All right, everyone, good afternoon. Welcome along to our latest Real Schools webinar. We hope that this one's going to be a valuable one for you. It certainly seems that we've hit a topic that people are interested in. We've had more than 120 people register for today. So we're really excited about that and the opportunity to bring something to you that maybe isn't specifically about what you do within the walls of the classroom, but is about how capable and how strong you're feeling to do that today. So my voice, I'm Adam Voigt, for those of you who don't know me. My voice is one that you're only going to hear for a minute or two today. I'm going to hand over to our resident expert at Real Schools in School Wellbeing in Ryan Martin in just a moment. But look, I wanted to, I guess, first of all, tell you one of the reasons, where our motivation came from to have a look at the whole concept of staff wellbeing and what we really need to do about it, and why I certainly am so delighted that Ryan's going to be presenting this today. When I had to think about it, there were probably three key reasons. There's been a fourth added today. The additional reason that you'll enjoy Ryan's presentation today is that he's getting a bit of a cold, so he's got a really, it's a man cold, and I don't want to make fun of that because it's an incredibly serious and terrible thing to be struck with. But it makes his voice incredibly sexy, so you're really going to enjoy that today. But look, the three content-based reasons that I think you'll enjoy today is, number one, is that I'm fully aware of the real depth that Ryan has gone to. I'll stop calling him Martin for some reason. The real depth that Ryan has gone to in looking into not only school wellbeing but into organisational wellbeing and what we can learn from other organisations also. So what he's done is look really deeply at that overlap and able to come up with things that really make a difference in terms of our own wellbeing as practitioners. The second thing that I love about Ryan's work is that he throws rocks at that, and he says that this is the actual genuine well-being in a school situation is far more important than doing the odd yoga class or the odd Friday afternoon drinks. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's not going to genuinely improve school well-being. And the last thing that I think that is incredibly important in Ryan's work is that he's done it. He's been there, done that in difficult circumstances, in challenging schools, and he's been able to keep morale and keep the well-being of his people as a priority, as a principle, and I think that's an incredibly exciting thing for us to be able to engage with today. So I'm going to hand over to Ryan in just a brief moment. I did just want to bring your attention to the control panel that's on your screen, because I do know that we have some newbies with us today. Ryan and I were just commenting that there's some names that we hadn't seen before in the attendee list who are already online today. So I do want to bring you to your attention that we would love you to interact with us today. So there are two ways that you can do that. Number one is that you'll see in your control panel a question box, and at any time you'll be able to get involved and by asking a question. So we're all, myself and I'll be in the background today, but Ryan, as the presenter today, will be keeping an eye on that question box, and so will our wonderful business manager, Chris, who will be in the background today. And if you do have any questions of a technical nature, you're more than welcome to put a question in there, and we'll keep a close eye on that and see if we can help you with that, whatever your challenge might be. We also, and I'm just, here I am, the webinar expert, just remembering now to share my screen. And we also, you'll be able to see on your on your dashboard there, you probably can see a hand up feature if you've got the latest version of software there. And what that means is that at any time during the webinar, if you've got a question that you would like to ask, but you don't want to actually just write it down, or you want to, like a classroom, put your hand up and ask that question. I can see at the moment that Anne Seymour, if you're there, you've got your hand up. That could be an accident, but if it's not, you can use that hand button to put your hand up and down. Well done, Anne. And at any time, we can unmute you, and we can hear what you've got to say or what you've got to ask, and really make sure that this is a tailored experience for you. So welcome aboard. I really hope you enjoy today. I'm now going to make sure that technology will not fail us here. This will work amazingly smoothly. I'm going to hand over to Ryan the ability to, first of all, speak. So Ryan, have we got you, mate?
Yes, you do.
Excellent.
And thank you. I'm not sure that my voice is that sexy, but I do have man flu, so you could imagine, all of you, how incredibly sick I am.
All right. Well, there you go. Poor baby. He's going to soldier on and get through the next 50 minutes or so. And I'm going to hand over the ability to present to Ryan now. And have a great day, guys.
Okay. So here we go. So obviously, thank you, Adam, for that introduction. I much appreciate it. Look, I suppose I started this picture. Obviously, we're talking about how to survive and thrive in an education or the changing educational landscape. But I think this picture is really, really relevant because a lot of the time we certainly talk about, you know, the outward appearance that we often see in schools, but it's often the things that really need to happen below the surface to get things right. And in particular around staff wellbeing, I think is really, really critical. One of the reasons why I've got really interested in this particular topic, and it kind of started as a leader in school, looking really closely at the graduate teachers coming in, and certainly got me really interested in, I suppose in many instances, they were thrown to the wolves. And the more I started asking questions, I kind of felt the same for some reason. It was very, very similar for our experienced teachers, feeling this really overwhelming sense of massive workloads, the expanding role of the classroom teacher and the challenge of those competing forces that include, I suppose, counselling on a day-to-day basis, parenting some of our kids who are not getting that at home. It might be, you know, in some schools it could be cleaning. There's also fundraising, and a lot of that is really eroding the quality time that we spent teaching students. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this has become, I suppose, a real passion of mine to look at this staff wellbeing, because I do have a real sense that we can do something about it, but it needs to be addressed. And I think one of the things we need to be very honest about where we're at and work from a very honest base. So without further ado, we'll get moving. But I think I suppose before we move to the next one, we certainly from my point of, oh goodness, see, this is where my lack of experience with this is showing. Probably this afternoon, we don't have a lot of time, and so it's going to be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose or the garden hose. So we'll certainly get moving very quickly through some concepts. Probably the good news in regard to that is obviously we're going to fire through a number of things this afternoon, but the exciting bit of news is that Adam and I we ran two conferences early this year in January. Adam ran one on leading whole school behaviour change, and I ran one around staff wellbeing. It was really well accepted, and we've decided that we're going to run that same conference in a number of capital cities. At the moment, we've confirmed Melbourne and Canberra, and we're sort of waiting on confirmation of a couple of others. So please keep an eye on that. We'll certainly get some information to you as fast as we can. So what I'm going to do, obviously working through this today and making sure that we cover off and it's relevant to the people in the audience, I thought it might be really worthwhile. We're just going to run a couple of polls here and just get a bit of a sense of our audience this afternoon. So we're just going to run this poll here. I'm just going to check here. Adam, I'm pretty sure this poll is going to run. I've just clicked on poll. Are you able to enlighten me here? No?
Sorry, mate. I'm back on now.
I'm just checking on this poll that I'm clicking the right button.
So do you want me to launch the poll for you? I can do that now if you like, from here.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could.
The one about the role?
Yeah, so this one's just about what role they're currently in, so just to get a sense of who's in the audience. So if you could just click on one of them that's relevant to you, and that will give us a little bit of a sense of who we're talking to, and certainly all of what we're covering today will be relevant to the groups that we've listed there, but just to get a bit of a sense of who's in the audience as well. So that poll is started, so please add your answer, and you can just do that via your... Okay, so we've got
nearly 80% of people have voted now, which is usually our little threshold. So if you like, mate, we'll close that one.
Yeah, we'll close that and we'll share that.
There we go.
Great. So we've got a whole bunch of teachers, which is perfect, because that's certainly where I was directing this presentation or this webinar to. So that's fantastic. The other one is, Adam, I want to be, hopefully if we could do the next poll, which is the last poll, but this one's around what's the greatest challenge to your well-being at work. So again, same thing, add your answers, and we'll share them with you in a couple of moments. Obviously, certainly, the workload is definitely one that's been is a real feature when we talk about the stresses associated with the work, and obviously student behaviour becomes a real challenge as well. And that was probably one of the reasons why we listed these 5. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but probably if we're thinking about the top 2, 3, maybe 5, we certainly, I suppose those are the key. So we'll share them now because it's pretty obvious the ones that are really starting. Yeah, so workload and student behaviour and obviously parent behaviour can have a real impact as well. Thanks, Adam. Thanks for your help with that. Okay, so I'm just checking. I reckon here we go. Okay, I'm back on. All right, so today we're going to look at a number of things. So one of them is around your ground zero. And when I talk about ground zero, I'm certainly talking about, at the moment, where are you right now with your health and well-being, relationships with staff, students, parents, what's your success rate look like in the class, workload, obviously we've spoken about that, and obviously the behaviour management of students. And if you're looking at an honest assessment of where you are, how are you coping with this stuff? Because your mood impacts others, there's no doubt. And so having an honest base to start from is really critical. So we're going to have a look at that. The other one we're going to look at is dealing with stress. When you're stressed, how are you dealing with it? What does that look like? And so for some people it could be that they go very silent. Other people it could be that they just completely withdraw or disengage from what's going on in the school. So there's ways that we deal with stress that are quite interesting, but also I think something that is really, really important, that we get a really strong handle on the way that we deal with our stress. The other one is looking at overcoming hurdles, and what does that look like for you? How are you coping when things are put in front of you that may seem insurmountable or really challenging, and bouncing back in a way that uses your strengths, and I'll certainly explain what I mean by that. Now, the other one is, and it seems a bit odd, this one, but certainly mine is fake it until you make it. And what I mean by that is, how do others see you, and walking tall despite how you may feel. Now, that might seem disingenuous, but it's certainly not what it's intended to mean. It's about thanking people that help you, connecting with colleagues, sharing ideas and skills. When you're doing it tough, if you stay engaged in the process and you get involved with your colleagues, that is really, really critical stuff, and very, very important that you stay involved, and despite not feeling fantastic, you're in there and having a real good go at it. Number 5 is connecting strengths to resilience, and I think this is a really interesting area, certainly that I've been looking at, particularly when we're looking through the work of the positive ed side of things, and then you can look at the reports that are coming out, the big wide-scale reports about successful school systems through the McKinsey report, and also the work of Fulham. There's some really strong evidence out there about when you're working within your strengths, that it's a really good place to be when it comes to being resilient when things get tough. And I suppose if I focus on what I'm good at and look for challenge, how can this impact on my well-being and those around me? So that's where we're going with that one. And number 6 we'll cover, and it's sort of the long game here. What does it look like over time when you're trying to improve your well-being? So how do we embed some really great habits and personal systems to our daily grind that keep us positive and productive in our school? So if we look at the ground zero, again, I suppose, where are you when it comes to well-being, and where are the people that you work with that are around you, and how are you seen by your staff as an example of well-being? Because I think one of these, it's a little bit of a flow-on effect. If people are setting really strong examples around this in school, around how they are operating when things are a bit stressful and the way they're coping with things, it really does help the general feel around the school. And I suppose when we look at this on zero, there's a reason why this is, I suppose, a problem. And if we look at, there's some really interesting stats that come out around this. But I think the idea that, you know, when we look at excessive workload, management of bullying, aggressive parents from time to time, there is no doubt that there's a reason why teachers are out there saying that their well-being is not where it should be at the moment. But I think it's really important that we don't ignore the fact that it needs to be starting from a really honest base, and you work from there. And I think that's one of the parts that I think is really, really important as well. So the teacher wellbeing tipping point, and I wrote something about this in a white paper that you can certainly access if you're interested in, and you can get hold of that through the website, through the Real Schools website. But I think the thing around this tipping point is, I think the part that worries me a lot is that we have an attrition rate in teachers that is growing, and the desire to leave the teaching profession because the challenges that are faced in the classroom seem too great to overcome. It's a really common problem, and it's leading to this attrition rate that seems to be growing. And you know, some of the statistics are staggering when it talks about teachers. You know, 15% of new teachers are thinking of leaving the profession within the first 3 or 4 years. Now that's a really sad indictment on our profession. We certainly don't want to be losing some of our, I suppose, our brightest and innovative new ideas that they bring to the table. We certainly don't want that. But the other thing is there's an attrition rate across our experienced teachers too that we certainly don't want to see growing at the rate that it is. And I suppose this is where I suppose the passion for me around this is, that we've got to turn this tipping point that's causing teachers to feel like the only choice they've got is to get out of the profession is something that certainly doesn't sit very well with me as a principal, or ex-principal I should say. Now, the hard facts, so there's pretty awful statistics that sit in here, but again, teachers are reporting the highest level of occupational stress, and that's against some professions that we would think would be more stressful: police, paramedics, and so on. Our principals are feeling stressed, so you know, some of those days when you walk into the principal's office and the principal's got that very blank look across their face, there's probably a reason for that. There's a huge amount of administrative stuff that comes flying across a principal's desk, and the ability for them to get out and demonstrate what probably is the reason why they got into the profession in the first place, teaching, it's highly unlikely. And I think that is not great for teachers either, because teachers look to their principals to be leaders around teaching and learning, and for a lot of teachers, it's almost, a lot of principals I should say, it's almost impossible to do that. The other one, I suppose, for teachers is stress, and there's no surprises there. There is an enormous amount of work. It can become quite administrative, and I think we need to be smart about the things that we're asking teachers to do outside of teaching as well, so that they don't feel as though beyond what they do from 9 to 3 or 3:30 in the classroom, that the way that we run our meetings and the way that we communicate to our teachers is one that really cares for them and makes sure that they're being looked after. So 15% of our graduate teachers are talking about leaving, as I said before, and some is related to the conservative nature of the job, workload, student behaviour, and again, a large-scale report, which is the TALIS report that surveyed 100,000 teachers, found that teachers felt undervalued, they're working in isolation, they're getting no feedback, and they don't observe other teachers. And we'll get back to that, because there's something in that is really, really interesting when we certainly look at well-being. So when we're dealing with stress, the challenges of education, everybody is different, and works along the continuum on any given day, somewhere between beauty and horror. And that's just the reality of what goes on in our class. And what happens at either end of these continuums can be really different. So I want to just have a quick talk about this. I know that many of you probably are really aware of this, but I think it's really worth just having a bit of a quick brush over this when we talk about the brain. And there's a couple of things. Obviously, our brainstem does some things for us that, and you know what, really, it's really great that it does do that for us, because I don't know how we would go in a stressful situation if we also had to try and control our breathing and our heart rate, making sure that that was still happening. I'd say when we were getting to those really tough stages, we'd probably faint. The other one that does some really great stuff for us is the cerebellum, and I don't really want to cover those because they do a really great job for us on most occasions, and they're pretty self-explanatory. But there's two parts here. When we talk about the limbic system, which is at the bottom of the screen, versus the neocortex, we're talking about, particularly with the neocortex, it's about our thinking, and it's our the ability to learn and use language and logic, and I suppose it's that thinking part of our brain. Now, when we get stressed, there's something else that occurs here, and it's the limbic system that takes over. Now, the limbic system causes these strong emotional responses that may feel like hate or anger, or and I think we talk about this fight, flight, or freeze, and this goes back to, I suppose, our caveman experiences, where when things were tough, for example, if we talk about the caveman experience of being in a cave, the saber-toothed tiger comes in, there's certainly not a lot of time to think about what you need to do. Now, our brain, this neocortex part of our brain, would be a little bit slow to get you out of that cave, and you're probably missing a leg when you finally decided to get moving. Whereas the limbic system is very much about the fight, flight, or freeze. And so I think the classic example, and I've had a good laugh about this with Adam, is the argument that you might have with your nearest and dearest. So I think often of my wife. We'll have an argument, I'll walk away, and 10 minutes later I've got this brilliant response that really would have settled the argument and got it over and done with. But because my neocortex was not operating and I was operating off the limbic system, I just came out with stuff that really was not helpful, not useful, and generally inflamed the situation. So it's really, I suppose it's really important that you are aware of what makes you snap and lose your cool, and can manage that even when not under pressure. Because if you are aware of these things and you practice it in your normal day, that, you know, I can feel this limbic or amygdala hijack, as they call it, coming on, and you're able to use those strategies that we're so familiar with, and we teach our kids all the time about breathe, take 10 breaths, or count to 6, or whatever it might be. That when we do become under fire, or feeling like we're under siege, that we can easily reference the skills that we have developed, particularly because we're aware of it, that we can easily reference it, and I suppose it allows us to make smarter decisions when we're in stressful situations. So when we talk about when negative emotions are allowed to drive our default behaviours, what are the things that suffer for you? Now, when I get stressed, the thing probably for me, and probably for, given that I probably could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, you know, the reality for me is that I go silent, and that's probably really very interesting for people that know me well. That I get the silence when I'm struggling with things. Now, I think, interesting enough, in crisis, what are your strengths in crisis? And I think for a lot of people, they're not entirely sure what their actual strengths are in those types of moments. And on the flip side, what's your kryptonite? So when you're really struggling, what are the things that really cause huge weaknesses, and what are the things that help you get out of those moments. Because the reality is, and this, we won't stay on this page too long because it's quite gruesome, I suppose, but when we're really struggling and we're not looking for answers and we're letting these things build, and this is from some great work from the Resilience Institute and a guy called Stuart Taylor called the death spiral, and yeah, it looks pretty horrifying, but you could probably identify with this in schools, particularly around strategies that might be in place or particular things that are going on, and I would probably think straight to something, for example, report writing time, where there's confusion about deadlines, complete disengagement from writing the reports, withdrawing, vulnerable, distressed, and then obviously we talk about depression, but there is definitely this spiral that occurs. And so if we're able to identify behaviours that are being driven by negative emotions, it certainly allows us to do something about that. And I think when we talk about this, and let's get off this slide because it's a bit gruesome, it's about overcoming the hurdles that we face and bouncing back. And I think that to me is what is a really important piece here. And I think when we look at overcoming the hurdles and bouncing back, when we talk about strengths, there's a number of strengths in place. So I'm just going to go forward to this slide here. Now these strengths are listed via a VIA, and I'm giving you the link at the bottom of the page. I would really encourage you to have a go at this survey. It's incredibly interesting, and it will list your character strengths. There's a whole lot of information attached to that. But one of the things that I found really interesting when we were looking at this, and I'll just flip back to the other slide, is when you uncover these strengths through this survey, in order to overcome hurdles, you need to know what your strengths are. And one of the interesting things is, I'll give you an example. So for me, honesty is probably one of the ones that sat quite highly when I did the survey. And when I thought a little bit about this, honesty is one of those things that when you are finding things tough, it's honesty that actually could help you out of the stressful situation. And I'll give you an example. So that might be that if you're concerned or not sure of something, the honest way to approach this would be to ask some clarifying questions to find out what exactly is going on. It could make a huge difference to how you're feeling about a particular concern. The other one would be, for example, if perseverance was one that was high on your list. And I'll go forward to this so you can have a look at what these are, and you may be able to think about ways you might deal with these. But perseverance would be to stick with the tasks that challenge you. Forgiveness might be about doing just that and moving on. So knowing your strengths can save you from a huge amount of time and heartache. And one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this process and the survey and the report, and it's free, so it's certainly a really interesting process. But the idea that some of these character strengths are particularly the strong character strengths are really fantastic ways to lead you out of the times when you're really stressed about things, because if you're really aware of your strengths, you're able to certainly use them to get you out of those tough spots that you experience. So they can be developed, these strengths, they can be misused and underused, and they come under a number of headings. So they come under wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, love, justice, temperance and transcendence. But obviously I certainly don't want to spend a lot of time on that today because we certainly don't have the time, but again, it's a really great piece of work. So the one, I suppose, if you were to look at that, one really great exercise from this slide is to write down 3 or 4 of these that you think are real strengths for you prior to doing the survey, because it's a really interesting process. I certainly didn't do it, but I wish I had of. It's a really interesting process to know whether you're really in tune with what your strengths are. So I'd encourage you just now, for the next, while I'm just finishing off with this slide, write down 3 or 4 of them that you think would be your real strengths, and then compare them against the character strengths survey when you complete it, because obviously I'm very confident that all of you are going to complete it and do the homework that I've set for you, but certainly be really interested to find out how close you were from I suppose your guesstimate to the actual survey. The other thing I suppose I just put in there is that there are some dark sides to these. So if I just use honesty as one example, the dark side to honesty is bluntness, and I'm sure many of you have experienced those blunt moments with people maybe, or yourself, that are strong in that characteristic. And there's probably, I suppose, another example would be love, and the dark side to love is exhaustion, and kindness is probably sometimes could be related to going broke. So we'll move on from this slide. So again, there's some really strong research around this. You certainly don't want to put these things in front of you if there's not some research attached to it, but being aware of your character strengths and using them certainly reduces the amount of stress and buffers you from vulnerabilities that can lead to that death spiral that I showed a couple of slides back. Increases vitality, motivation, confidence, and I suppose that's related to the fact that you're aware of what makes you really good at what you do. It can predict well-being across a lifetime, and knowing your strengths is associated with living the good life. And there's a couple of interesting little facts about this survey. Is that the big 5, work satisfaction, the big 5 character strengths that relate really closely to that is curiosity, zest, hope, gratitude and judgment. And the most common that come out of this survey, and there's been, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of over 1 million people have actually taken part in this survey, but the most common are kindness, fairness, honesty, gratitude and judgment. So just out of interest, I thought I'd add them to what we're covering today. So this fake it until you make it, and I think it's important that I explain this, because we don't always feel like Superman or Superwoman, but we don't. So we work with others, but sometimes that is just we need to set the example, particularly whether you're in leadership or class teachers, and that's certainly the audience today. Setting the example is really critical here. This is not about being dishonest. It's actually about retraining yourself to develop resilience in tough times. When I'm not feeling great, it is okay for people to know, but I'm going to get on with the job and work through this. I think that's a really critical part of this. The example this sets for those around you, including your colleagues and students, is extraordinarily positive if you can do that. Now, teaching is difficult, and I absolutely accept that. I know that very, very well from over nearly 20 years of being involved in education, but we need to understand that most of the great moments in our life occur at work. And when I've shared that with teachers, it's something that sits people back on their seat a little bit. And when we start to talk about the hours that you spend at work, you really need to think that it's important that I understand what my strengths are and use them, because I'm at work, you're at work an awful amount of time, and you've got to create an environment where you can thrive. And it's not about survival, it's about thriving through what is a fantastic profession that is no doubt very challenging. Now this is a quote from, and look, I would love to tell you that I'll get his surname correct, but I won't. But I'll have a go anyway. So this guy Mahaley, Csikszentmihalyi, I hope that you're all impressed by my pronunciation. This is a really fantastic quote, and I think this resonates really, really loudly for me. The best moments in life occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Now, the reason why this resonates for me so strongly, and I hope it does for you too, is teaching students is both difficult and worthwhile. So what I'm contending here, that there needs to be a shift in the way we get engaged at school. I would suggest looking for challenge, working really closely with your peers to design programs that are innovative, engaging and challenging to deliver, because that essentially is where we find that those great moments in life where we really put our skills on the table, and we have a crack at things that are exciting and challenging and engaging. All the research, and there's some giants that I suppose in this field, particularly around education, but Fullen is one that is often referred to in some of these spaces, but he talks about the power of building social capital at school and work. And if I reflect back on the times where I've really been enjoying my time, it's certainly when there's a really good social environment at work, and that's not about drinks on a Friday, although that certainly helps, as Adam spoke about a little bit earlier, but it's actually this idea that we work with each other in a trusting environment, we share practice, we share resources. They're those moments where it makes sense why you've got into this game in the first place. So I suppose it creates multiple benefits for individuals and teams when we're creating this really strong social capital in our schools. And I suppose the question that I'll ask before I move on here, and this is probably just one for you to reflect on, is how challenged are you in the work that you're doing at the moment? And it might be worth considering, and we'll cover some more stuff around this in a moment, but certainly if you're feeling as though your job at the moment is not challenging, I would really encourage you to seek some challenge, because it's certainly, strangely enough, may mean you're working a little bit harder, but certainly will give you some more meaning to your work. So when we talk about challenge, it's not about taking on something that is completely out of your realm at all. It's about, and I think it's a little bit like the Goldilocks rule. So it's not too hard, not too easy. It's about finding that just right challenge that uses your strengths, that allows you to really, I suppose, when you're certainly putting yourself in these challenging situations and taking on projects that are exciting and innovative, often that I suppose the well-being and the concerns or how you're feeling about things can sometimes move to the background, because your ability to concentrate on this focused project that's a little bit more engaging can certainly replace some of those really negative thoughts and tough times that you might be having in school. So I suppose there's a part of this that I'll explain a little bit about. So when we talk about staff engagement and staff ownership, and I certainly ask that question, how engaged are you? There's some moments when we look across this model. It's certainly about being immersed in activities that contribute to the success of the school, and at the same time enhances your well-being. And if engagement is a positive predictor of well-being, then we have a really powerful tool to transform well-being. So if we talk engagement, what gets you engaged at work? And when there's high staff engagement and there's really strong staff ownership, we have real catalysts for this ignition or igniting of these really powerful intentions across staff. So when we talk about high engagement and a high sense of ownership, when you've got that in your teaching role, it naturally improves well-being, because teachers have the capacity to perform their role at a high level, experience challenge, have input into the direction of the school, and are better able to handle job-related stress. That's the reality. And so I hope you can see where I'm heading. Certainly, I suppose this is where the chucking rocks at some of the concepts around what we think actually helps our teachers. And while there is no doubt that weekly yoga sessions, Friday drinks, really do contribute to the morale around a school, they're actually not long-term fixes of staff that are sitting in front of kids every day. So again, that's why I'm contending this idea that you're highly engaged and you own the work that you're doing. And certainly I would be encouraging leadership to make sure that these ingredients are sitting within your school. It allows, I suppose, it builds the capacity of staff to do their duties at a high level, and that's such an imperative. I think the other thing is when we're engaged at work, the flow-on benefits to our kids, and that's critical here. Is that obviously we take on this very noble profession to make sure that we're having a really positive impact on kids. Well, when you're working in a space where you feel good about what you're doing, you've got a sense of ownership and you're engaged, the flow-on effect is that we get really great outcomes for our kids as well. So when we talk connecting our strengths to resilience, if you understand your strengths and you use them to make your work more enjoyable, challenging, fulfilling, how does this help your ability to deal with the tough stuff? So that really there's no doubt that teaching is a balancing act. The studies say that we are born with a happiness set point, I found this very interesting when I first looked at this. So our happiness set point governs up to 50% of our sense of happiness at any given time, and we can't really change that. So that is just something that's there. Obviously, we work with people that are incredibly happy and bubbly and vibrant, who we often go, God, how do they keep up that energy? And then we also work with people at the other end of the spectrum that feel probably a little bit flatliners, maybe a little bit gloomy about things. But the other side of this, so there's another 50% that needs to be taken up here, is that 10% is determined by your material circumstance. So, I mean, we know that people spend an inordinate amount of time chasing material happiness, the car, the house, or the holidays and so on. But it's 40%. The other 40% is attributed to our behaviour or our activities. This 40% is what we can shape by choosing the behaviour and environments that make us happy. And this is why I suppose I've certainly talked today about engaging in your strengths and making sure that you're aware of them, because if you're aware of them and you're choosing those behaviours and the types of environments in your school that make you happy, you actually can have an enormous impact on how you feel, and being engaged dramatically increases the odds of being happy more often. So use your strengths to get engaged, own your work. It gives purpose and a determination to weather the tough stuff, and get back to the good stuff that is impacting positively on your well-being. So what I think, we'll stop for one moment. What we've talked about here is some of the things that impact really positively on your well-being is making sure that teachers understand their strengths and they work in their strengths. There's some really clever work around this about schools structuring based on character strength survey, but structuring their groups so that they have a really nice balance of strengths within the group, and that allows a really great sharing of ideas and innovation, and allows people to work in their strengths and feel as though they have a sense of ownership within the group rather than sitting there and not being so involved. So there's some really great things you can do around that. But engaging and worthwhile work is critical here. Is the work that you're doing, does it really feel worthwhile and engaging? And I think when we talked about the smart things that can happen at school and the old school approach of how meetings are ran and so on, the teachers do have a voice here, and they certainly can have an impact on the work that you're doing and how engaged you are by certainly in the way that you work with your teams, and I suppose that example that you set as well. The other one is that I think is critical, and I'm not sure that we do such a great job of this, is progress is visible and celebrated. Now, if great things are happening at your school, you need to celebrate this stuff. This is the stuff that makes getting up in the morning and getting through the school gate really enticing, because when we are having success, we make a big deal of it, and we make sure people are recognised for the great work that they do as well. I talked about that social capital-based strategies, but that's when you have that really strong social capital within your school, it creates really great collaborative cultures, and certainly that collaboration and professional learning communities is a real buzzwords and terms at the moment. But if you're creating that real collaboration where people are working together in worthwhile work and celebrating the great things that are happening, then I think there's some real strength around that stuff. The other one, obviously, I talked about that collaboration, but we're really clear about our expectations. So it's not all about celebration, but there are some expectations in place, and we're clear about them, and there's no murkiness, because I think often we talk about that confusion and disengagement is around when we're not particularly clear about expectations. And again, I mentioned that McKinsey report, which surveys many high-performing schools, but their recommendations about these high-performing schools have a couple of things in common, is that there's strong peer power and there's high staff engagement. So I would say that it's an imperative to make sure the teams that you're involved in work in are really high-functioning. So just we're just going to go through this slides very quickly. When we talk about your health and readiness to get in the trenches each day, if we look at this list, and it's certainly not an exhaustive list, but what are the biggest areas of need for you, and what could you do to turn that around? And I think that's probably some of the things that we've covered today. You know, if I talk about match fitness, making sure that I look after my health and fitness, the things that if I'm struggling with that, the things that I can do for that is making sure that I allow time every day, despite some other things that I think I need to do, by making sure that my health and fitness is in check, even though I do have man flu at the moment. So as I said, I'm incredibly sick, not really. But if I can keep those things in check, the other things that I have to do, I'll get done. So it's about making sure that you prioritise the things that are important to you, that allow you to walk in the gate each day feeling good about things. And that might be that making sure, for example, the work relationships are really solid. And if they've been fracturing a little bit, repair them. You know, there's easy ways to repair them. It might be about being a little bit honest about a few things. But again, there are ways to deal with these things and turn what might be an issue for you and turn around quite quickly. So if we look at the long game, and certainly I need to get moving because there are a couple of things I still want to cover. So if we look at the long game, and this is about putting things in place that are sustainable and certainly allow you to make sure that your well-being is looked after. So we've covered a few things today. So we've looked at this, your well-being is critical, there's no doubt about that, and mood impacts performance. So it's incredibly important that we find opportunities to laugh and challenge yourself and your team. Certainly not asking you guys to start up laughter clubs. I'm sure they can help, but work's meant to be fun. It's meant to be a place that you can go and share a laugh and challenge yourself and make mistakes and you know, have a bit of a giggle about it and get back on the horse and go again. It's also really important to know your strengths and your team's strengths, and you know, because it builds confidence, engagement, and well-being. Certainly, get relationships right. I talked about this idea that you thank your team, and instead of saying well done, you ask them how they did such a great job. People want to tell their colleagues what they did to create that success that's occurred. The other one is obviously seek meaning for the work being done. Why is it being done, and how does it make a difference? And I think that's really important that that's communicated and that you have a really strong understanding about that as well. And recognisability of your colleagues. And when we talk about that, is that if your colleagues are doing something particularly good, then it's another really strong thing to just say, I'd really like to see that in practice. Could you demonstrate that to me? Because that creates this culture where people are challenged to take risks and improve the way that they do things. So obviously we go back to this slide, and again, what we've been talking about today is not about the top of this tree. It's about putting things in place that allow, that I suppose the fruit and the beautiful green part of this tree will take care of itself. But it's so important that you get the foundations of this well-being stuff in check, because it's so critical to how well you do your job. And what is also really critical is these kids need you doing a great job, and the students that you work with need you to be in the best possible shape, both physically and mentally, so that when you get into the classroom, we know kids are so perceptive, they can sense when things are not going right, and sometimes they'll make you pay for that. So, I think it's critical that you put some things in place, and that's about being aware of your strengths and making sure that you're engaging in you're involved in highly engaging work is really critical as well. So look, that brings us to the end of that, and look, absolutely rapid fire. There's so many places that I could go in the hour that I've had, but it just, look, the time flies so quickly. If you want to know any more about this, there's a couple of things that you can do. You'll see through Real Schools that there is a Facebook page, and you certainly can get involved through the Facebook page. Adam and myself are constantly posting new things up on that page, resources and so on that could be really useful. There is a Twitter feed continually, and there's some really great links to some fantastic stuff that's going on out there in the educational space. The other thing that's, I think, really useful for you is each month the Real Schools member site is updated with monthly newsletters. These webinars are occurring every month on topics that we think are really pertinent and relevant in the current educational landscape. There's a ton of resources, but if you're interested in joining up as a member, there's a fantastic number of resources. In the question box, if you just type in member, and we will make sure that that's followed up for you, and we can get some information to you about how you can join up as a member of Real Schools. It's not expensive, and it's a really fantastic resource that you can share with your colleagues. And there's teacher practice articles, and there's cultural leadership articles. So we try and cover all bases. It's all obviously linked to the AITSL standards, so we certainly want to make sure that the stuff we're covering off here is relevant and aligned with the professional standards. So we certainly make sure that's sitting in there, and if you don't have a huge amount of time, we make sure that there's a little cheat sheet there for you so you can whip through that really quickly also. The other one that Adam and I are really proud of as a product that's out there is this is a really innovative approach to building capacity on a range of topics for teachers. So it's a 12-month program, and it's certainly about us, about building, I suppose, the capacity of staff and transforming and accelerating practice and classroom engagement. So one of the things that sit in here is about the work that we do. There's a number of modules looking from behaviour management to ways that we deal with difficult things in classrooms across a range of topics. If you're interested in that, as certainly we would encourage you to put TFT in one of the question boxes, and we can in the comment box, and we will get back to you with some information around that. So look, again, if you do have any questions about anything to do with what's been covered today, you're certainly welcome to contact Real Schools on info@realschools.com.au. Also, the website's a fantastic provider of information and resources for teachers, so I'd encourage you to do that. Look, again, as I said, it's certainly that hour has gone very, very quickly, and there is no way that you can cover such a broad topic and such a important topic at the moment and cover everything off. I hope you've found it really, really helpful. And what I would really strongly encourage you to do is that little bit of homework around picking off those 4 or 5 character strengths and then carrying out that survey, but then also obviously being really aware of what those strengths are and working in those strengths so that your days at school are as positive and productive and engaging as they possibly can be. So thanks everyone. Have a fantastic evening, and I look forward to working with you all via webinars or anything that we do through the Real Schools community. Thanks very much.